I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee. Today is September 24th, 2014. I'm Councilmember Blong Yang, Chair of the committee. With me today are Council Members Kevin Reich, Cam Gordon, and Abdi Warsami. I believe Councilmember Lene Palmisano is going to be joining us shortly, and she is here. One other note is that Council President Barb Johnson is away on city business, and so she won't be joining us today. I want to apologize to everybody about 2 weeks ago when we had a regularly scheduled meeting and we had all these excused absences, and so some of the items that are on our agenda were on that agenda, but we moved most of them. So the first two items on our consent agenda are the federal 2014 Paul Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Program, and that's to authorize acceptance of a grant award of $93,888 from the U.S. Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, and execute a contract with them, and to approve budget appropriation, and this will be referred to Ways and Means. Second item is to authorize a contract agreement with the Minnesota Timberwolves for Minneapolis Police Department to provide bomb security services for basketball games during the 2014-2015 season at the Target Center, to be reimbursed at an estimated cost of $44,640, and this will be referred to Ways and Means as well. We have three discussion items. The first discussion item would be for the Minneapolis Police Department to talk about the officer body camera test and evaluation, and this was a staff directive from the previous council cycle. So we'll get that. The next item is the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media in the American Indian Movement, and this is a presentation of a Declaration of Indigenous Equality letter to the University of Minnesota. And the third item is a presentation on the activity of the City of Minneapolis with regards to the military training exercises, and we will have presentations and or folks here to answer some questions related to the history and also just what we could do this last time around and what we can do in the future. So with that, the first two items on consent, council members, anyone want to pull anything off for discussion? All right, seeing none, I'm gonna pull the second item off briefly for comment. And I had a reporter call me with regards to the bomb security services for the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball game. And for myself, we've seen these actions before. They're fairly routine, actually. We provide bomb security services for the Minnesota Golden Gophers football games and for the Vikings games. So, for me, pretty routine. I'm going to ask our city attorney or assistant city attorney who's sitting with us in this committee to maybe comment a little bit about that as well, if that's okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, just generally, it's not unusual. For many years, the Minnesota Vikings and the Timberwolves and the University of Minnesota have hired bomb detection services from our police department, and it's fully reimbursed. We charge those entities full cost recovery on those items, and usually it involves a canine bomb detector and one or two staff people to be present at those games. And so the police department's been doing that for a number of years.
Okay, thank you. Council members, any questions? Anyone want to talk about anything? All right, hearing none, I will move for approval of those two consent items. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion carries. All right, the third item is for the Minneapolis Police Department to speak about officer body camera test and evaluation, and I'm not seeing AC Clark, so I'm going to move on to the next item, because I imagine he's the one that's going to be presenting. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Well, we will move on to the next item then. The next item is the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media in the American Indian Movement, and the person that's coming up to present is David Glass. Good afternoon, Mr. Glass.
Good afternoon.
So we're going to give you about 10 to 15 minutes, if that's okay. Okay, and I will cut you off. Okay.
Well, first, let me say Chimigwich to the esteemed representatives of the City of Minneapolis. National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media is happy to be here this evening or this afternoon. And I'd like to speak to you first in my language and say, Bonjour, Indigenika Jawanu Anini, Gechida, Kiwabidan, Dinamika, racism, against racism. My name is Jawanu Anini, Southern man who walks with bears. I'm from the White Earth Reservation, and I'm a warrior against racism for our peoples. So the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media educates and, when necessary, confronts the individual, institutional, and governmental influences that propagate racism in sports and media. The board members and advisors include myself, one of the founders, Clyde Belcourt, Olympian Billy Mills, Olympian Henry Boucher, former Viking Joey Browner, Charlene Teeters, attorney Larry Leventhal, Nick Coleman, Rick Cardenas, Michelle Mills, and Norma. We're here today to ask the City of Minneapolis to enforce Minneapolis ordinances to restrain, prohibit, and litigate the illegal display of discriminatory, derogatory, and racially inciting American Indian mascots manufactured and presented by non-Indian, indigenous peoples in public accommodation and workplaces, including public and private stadiums, educational facilities, and governmental properties. In your packet, you'll also find a resolution from the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. All 11 tribes, nations in the state of Minnesota have passed their own resolution in terms of the support of the work that we do. We ask this body to allow the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media to appear before the full council and empower the city attorney to immediately act to protect our children, women against domestic violence and child abuse. We also immediately seek formal enforcement of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and a restraining order on behalf of the indigenous citizens of Minneapolis, and, if necessary, sue the federal authorities against any team or league that brings to Minneapolis forms of discrimination that are directly and specifically prohibited in public accommodations, which include sports arenas, stadiums, and establishments within such facilities. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to our attorney, Larry Leventhal. I'll invite Mr. Leventhal up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Honorable council members, I'll continue indicating what the areas of concern that we have, but we are asking that you, as members of the Minneapolis City Council, announce at this time and have the whole City Council consider and announce that professional teams that use American Indian mascots are not welcome in Minneapolis, and declare that the city would take all legal measures to prohibit such teams utilizing facilities within the city of Minneapolis while demonstrating such mascots and names, and would take efforts to limit laws and actions that hurt American Indian people. And of course, we're thinking very immediately of November 2, when the Washington Club, calling themselves Redskins, comes to Minneapolis and would be performing and playing at the University of Minnesota. We want to also suggest that on a long-term basis, procurement practices be utilized, and that you not use companies that use American Indian mascots and names. These are very harmful. That the Minneapolis City law enforcement be directed to treat nonviolent acts of civil disobedience by indigenous people to protect their children and their families with nonviolence and legal restraint. If the acts are nonviolence, the addressing them should be nonviolent. There are several slides which have Minneapolis ordinances, and of course you should be very aware of those, and I'm sure you are. But it's the public policy of the city of Minneapolis under Section 1 of 139.10 that there'll be non-discrimination as to race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, national origin, and that there be prevention of discriminatory practices in various areas, including public accommodations, which certainly any stadiums in which games are played are public accommodations. It's prohibited under Minneapolis City Ordinance that people be treated differently because of race, color, creed, religion. And that's also violations of other ordinances and other acts under which the city has subscribed and is subject to. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 provides that there'd be non-discrimination and that and that it would be an illegal practice to have discrimination, again, regarding equal access for goods, services, and facilities. The Minnesota Human Rights Act provides for freedom from discrimination and provides that it's an opportunity to obtain full and equal utilization of public accommodations and employment. Public accommodations, of course, very evident when we're talking about ballparks. Also consider the employment issues that would relate to Native peoples who are employed, and hearing terms such as Redskins, which delineates a history of scalping Indian people and bringing them in. This is where the term originated in order to get a bounty for the Redskins. We'd also call attention to International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the United Nations International Declaration on Indigenous Rights. We can provide documentation of all these items, but it's important to realize that we are here in the city of Minneapolis, which has taken leadership by your city council in taking a look at what October 12th should represent, Indigenous Peoples Day. And we'd like to suggest that there be an expansion of that. Indigenous rights should be expanded to be considered every day. And we would hope that as this issue is being brought before the public, and it will be brought before the public, that the city council, as it has in the past, take a leadership role. And we think that this would be your function and your role to do that, and ask that you do take leadership to do that. And if we have a little bit of time left, I'd like to introduce Clyde Belcourt, who is the national chairman of the American Indian Movement, has been instrumental in setting up the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media to address the importance of this issue.
Good morning. Just about everything is spelled out in the packet that I gave you. It's the first time in our history that we've had every national and international civil and human rights organization join us, from the National Congress of American Indian to the NAACP, and also the Jewish people across America supporting us in this effort. We've been dealing with this issue now for 46 solid years. Started out with the North Dakota Fighting Sioux. If they knew what that word meant, they wouldn't use it. It's a concoction of French and Indian, which means enemy. Or slithering snake in the grass is a better interpretation of what that word means. And they, like 1,400 other teams across America that have changed their name, finally are in the process of doing that today. And so once you just look at the packet that I gave you, and you'll understand how important this is, not just to Native people, but all people, particularly our children and your children and unborn generations to come, that they start getting the history right. This history goes all the way back to Governor Calb in Newfoundland in the 1500s. The Puritans, the Christians that landed here seeking a better way of life. Indian people gave them everything that they wanted. And of course, they sent word back when Columbus got here. He sent word back to the Queen and those that financed his trip that they'll give you their shirt off to their back if you ask them for it. They have no prisons, they have no jails. They don't know how to cuss or swear or use derogatory terms in their language. They're perfect for exploitation. And through the scalping policies and the bounties, there have been over 100 tribes that have been totally erased from the face of the earth. They used to bring in the bodies, but it become too cumbersome to bury them, too expensive. So Governor Calvi issued a proclamation under the attack by the women, Christian women in the church, demanded that that be changed. So he said, then you only have to bring in the skull. They were bringing them in by the wagon loads, gunny sacks full, bushel baskets full, to collect their bounty. And they spoke out again. Women who had no rights back then spoke out again. Church women, Christian women spoke out once again. And the governor said, to prove that you kill an Indian, that's all you have to bring is a scalp, a lock of their hair. So now they could go after the women and children, not just the warriors and the men. And henceforth, all those tribes were raised on the face of the earth. And when they took those scalps and that blood ran down, there was little babies, and those children screaming. That's where the word redskin, they didn't know how to say Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Dakota. They had no names for us, but savages. It was perfectly legal all the way up until 1924. In some places, it's still legal today, like in South Dakota, to kill an Indian. And we want to put a stop to that. We want the education to get out there, who we are, what we contribute to modern day society, and build some pride. And build some pride so we can take our children to a Vikings game or a game when they're playing the Cleveland Indians in baseball. When they start getting a little bit behind, they say, scalp them other Redskins, scalp them Indians. You know? They come in mascots called Chief Wahoo. Cleveland Indians with teeth from one ear to the other, chicken feather in their hair, their faces painted red, do a tomahawk chop. We don't even know what a tomahawk is in our culture. That's John Wayne frontier mentality, George Armstrong Custer frontier mentality. And that's what we're trying to erase here in America and give people to respect and honor the contributions of everything that America has today. They received it from us. And we're asking you to honor those treaties that were made with Indian people about peace. And then after they made it, they were stomped on immediately, all of our land, and they still are today. We're asking that to stop. We're asking your help in doing that. And call on the president of the university to honor his own policies. That's all we're asking, honor their own policies and not allow that to take place that weekend. We need your support. You have supported us in the past. Every time we've brought these issues up, you've always supported us. We appreciate that. And we want you to step forward again and give us that support.
One last thing. Claude has given you a very descriptive historical context of what this word means. One only has to visit our website or our Facebook page on the National Coalition to see that just recently that there's all forms of discrimination that are continually representing themselves in our own backyard. Last year up at NDU, they had prior to the football games, they had passing out T-shirts of bison mounting Indian women in their traditional dress. Disgraceful. Just totally disgraceful in terms of who we are as a people. Most recently this year, we had women, fraternities, women who were wearing T-shirts to start the baseball season or some event with talking with something about super drinkers. And in that picture, it was spelt with the Sioux name in P-E-R, and they had Native women chugging, beers, and they walked around on the campus with that. Nothing was said by administration. They did that for a full weekend. All right, go on our website or our Facebook page to check that out. So we ask again that this council step forward, as they have in the past, to address racism against this particular issue and other issues that will come your way with regards to sports. Jimmy Gwitch.
Thank you, Mr. Loss. Council members, any questions or comments? Councilmember Gordon.
I do have a question. I also have a staff direction that everybody should have at the table here to maybe help us take the next step. And I really appreciate you coming in here. This is, I think it's important that we hear this kind of information and that the public hears this information and we get this out. I really kind of appreciate the legal angle you're trying to get here and the case that you're making. I think it gives us some more ammunition. I think last year at about this time, when the Washington team was going to be playing at the Vikings Stadium, 6 council members drafted and signed a letter that we sent forward that clearly didn't have any effect. Maybe we need to do a little more than that if we're going to have any effect. You mentioned a restraining order. Have you asked any judges or have you taken any action on this? And is this something that individuals could do? Or do you think the city has some special standing and that it's our responsibility?
I think that the city would have some special standing, your governmental body, and can speak for the people in the city. And you can seek to assure that your city ordinances can be honored and followed. An individual citizen doesn't have that same type of prerogative.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I don't know if there's, I could move.
Any other questions from council members? Councilmember Palmisano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if our own legal resources might have anything to say about this or what the implications of what they're asking us to do here might have in other areas. I mean, clearly these actions, these behaviors are not condoned, they're deplorable, but what kind of legal framework might we be operating in here, Mr. Osborne or Mr. whomever?
I'll defer to my boss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ginder.
Chair Yang, Councilmember Palmisano, whenever we would look at something like this, obviously we have to look at the framework that we would analyze this under the First Amendment. There are significant speech concerns raised by proposed action that was raised here today. So that would be probably the fundamental framework we would look at this under. And as you're aware, that content-based regulation is generally prohibited under the First Amendment. So be glad to do an analysis pursuant to the council directive, but that would be kind of the underlying framework.
Anyone else? Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I kind of trying to come up with what are the best strategies or what we should do next, and it seems the least is we could formally ask for that analysis. So I prepared a staff directive to direct the city attorney's office to research and offer a legal opinion on or before October 22nd on whether the city of Minneapolis has a legal authority under civil rights laws to enforce a ban on the use of the name Redskins, as well as a ban on the use of the image worn by the Washington, D.C. professional football team while playing in the city of Minneapolis at the stadium operated by the University of Minnesota. So it's fairly specific, but it could take some work, but I think having something back by October 22nd gives plenty of time. That also gives us a chance to see what we can learn before they're scheduled to play there on November 2nd. And I can speak to that a little bit.
Why don't you do that? So the motion before us is a staff directive that was just read by you with regards to the city attorney's office looking into this matter, doing the research and offering us some sort of opinion on this.
Yes.
Why don't you speak on that?
Well, I think that it's certainly worth the effort. I think there's an interesting case, and when I look at the Minneapolis ordinance itself, there's that third clause. It's pretty broad. I noticed that you highlighted the term pornography that's used in it, and there it is in front of me. So declare that we want to prevent and prohibit all discriminatory practices based on race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, national origin, sex, including sexual harassment and pornography, affectional preference, disability, age, marital status, or status with regard to public assistance with respect to employment, union membership, housing accommodations, property rights, education, public accommodations, or public services. It just seems like preventing all discriminatory practices is pretty broad. This could give us some broad authorities. And as we know, there is an issue of freedom of speech, but we also know that we do have opportunities sometimes to regulate the content and where it can be used and how it can be used. And we see that, I think, in especially adult-oriented communications or other things like that. I think that this is definitely a minefield probably walking into, and the courts could figure it all out, but it would be great if they could, because it seems like right now, leaving it up to the NFL, they can't seem to come up with the right decision, and we are stuck here. There have been plenty of opportunities, I think, for them to do so. And the university could show some leadership in this as well. And I do commend the university president for his position he's taken and a stand he's taken, but it also, I believe, he's feeling like his hands are tied too, and his legal team has said he doesn't really have any authority to do this. I will also note the staff direction does name the University of Minnesota Stadium, so we'll find out more about that. If this doesn't go well, there'll probably be another, well, probably several more at that stadium, but then there'll be another stadium where they'll probably want to play in the future, and we'll have to look at, do we have any more leverage over that? Sometimes the University of Minnesota thinks they have special rules and regulations that the city can't touch, but hopefully our civil rights ordinance certainly can touch them in terms of housing and employment. I'm sure that it has.
It's not up for, I guess, comments. At this point, it's a discussion up here. Council members, any other comments, questions? All right, well, I'm going to add my comments to this. I support this staff directive. I think it's really important for us to, take a deep look into what we can and cannot do. I mean, obviously, there are First Amendment concerns, and that's, as an attorney, I mean, that's the first thing that I thought of as well. But, we have civil rights legislation from the federal, state, and even the local levels. And, it's important for us to take a look at all options to see what we can do and what we can't do. Just thinking about, whether we do have standing to do any of this stuff is probably an important aspect of the whole thing. But this is a good opportunity for us to have our city attorney's office take a look at this matter to give us the best advice on what we can do moving forward. My best sense is that the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media, some of the things that they are asking for is quite expansive, and I don't know if we can do all of that. And, as Councilmember Gordon said, I mean, it's certainly a minefield, but, to the extent in which maybe some of the things we can do, I mean, we certainly should be looking into that. And so, I encourage my other colleagues to support this staff direction. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one additional question, because I recognize that this is a national coalition. I was wondering if we could ask those presenting today to comment on how other cities have perhaps dealt with this or worked with this issue, what they've found as being critical to success there.
Sure, I will open that up.
I've been watching the sports news almost every night, particularly Keith Olbermann. And he said that what we're asking to be done here today by our city council is taking place in 7 or 8 other cities right now, where the team is the Washington football franchise is going to be playing, including Texas and places like that. There are groups that have formed and they're coming together, and their merchandise dropped 39.5% since last November. In the National Football League, went up 3%, but theirs dropped. Nobody's buying their materials and nobody's buying their shirts and sweaters and all that. So this momentum is caught hold all the way across America. There are lawsuits and they're already being filed in other states to stop them from coming there.
Thank you, Mr. Bellecourt. Mr. Yelsey, you look like you want to come and say something, so why don't you do that?
I just wanted to respond to Councilwoman Palmisano's question a little bit more detail. There's the city council in Washington, D.C. has moved to ban the name just recently. In fact, that's the last day or two. And the FCC is being approached. All regulated media is being approached, and there's a lawsuit now in action in Washington, D.C., basically changing the way we think about the name Redskin and all of these mascot names. So what's happening is, with women's violence being a subject in the NFL, everyone's wondering why the NFL is supporting that. We're tying the word Redskin to violence against women. American Indian women experience 2.5 times the rate of sexual violence of any other group in America, and partly because they're diminished by the use of these mascots. So around the country, the whole consciousness is being raised. City councils are acting. Various groups are approaching the FCC and also other regulated organizations. You're familiar with the Trademark Act. So a lot of fronts are being opened up here, including women's civil rights as well. And that's the new one that just came up and became something of national attention the last 2 weeks.
Mr. Leventhal?
Yes, I just wanted to reflect on something that you were talking about today as the meeting started, providing some city services and equipments for all sports teams. Perhaps sports teams that are offensive by their very nature should not be afforded that type of access to city services and property.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Warsame?
I have a follow-up question to Councilmember Paul Massano's question in terms of the actions taken by other municipalities. You mentioned that, somebody mentioned that Washington, D.C. or District of Columbia City Council made a ban. Can you just talk about that a little bit more, please? And what did they ban exactly? Because I see a resolution here from November the 5th, 2013.
Yeah, I thought Mr. Yelsey said that it was proposed at this point, but that
was it
they haven't
proposed or was it
approved
banned?
anything yet.
There was just a recent news announcement, and I don't have the details of exactly what that is, but I do know that the entire council basically said that they do not, just like members of our council voted to say that the word Redskin is one that should be changed, and they advocate for that, even though it's in their community.
Well, Mr. Yelsey, could you forward that information to us? I mean, post-meeting.
That would be very helpful.
I certainly will.
Thanks.
Council members, anyone else with questions or comments? All right, hearing none, the motion before us is to approve the staff direction. And does anybody want this staff direction to be read again, or you have a copy in front of you? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. And I'm going to ask the clerk to further clarify what this means, because as I understand it, certainly we can pass this staff directive, but does it need to go to the full council with regards to how we move forward on this?
I believe it does, yes.
Okay, okay. All right, Councilmember Gordon?
I just wanted to alert my colleagues here that I'm also thinking of drafting a resolution, essentially taking the letter that we wrote last year that 6 of us signed and seeing if there isn't interest in the whole council to maybe formalize that. That will be more of a call for them to change the name and for the university not to have them use the name. I mean, it won't be directing us to take any other action, but I'm interested in doing that. I think last time because of time and also because of the support that I was thinking that I might have or not have for a resolution from the council. We decided a letter with 6 of us signing it was a good thing, but I think that this could be a more powerful gesture to actually pass a resolution and maybe even look at what Washington did back in November, Washington, D.C. and others.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. The next item on our agenda is the Minneapolis Police Department Officer Body Camera Test and Evaluation. And this was a staff direction from Councilmember Palmisano and myself, but mostly her. You get a lot of the credit for this. And this is a direction for MPD staff to address the following regarding the pilot study's design and scope. A, how the MPD is ensuring a randomized and controlled study sample. B, measures of success for the study. C, how practical and seasonal challenges unique to other study sites be addressed. D, how the study will be independently designed and reviewed. E, policy framework initiatives. And this will be AC Clark, right? AC Clark. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. As it relates to the body camera process, we are currently in the preliminary stages of getting those operational and getting those out to our officers, the 36 volunteers that we have. DC Glampy, Deputy Chief Glampy, is currently in Calgary at a conference for body cameras to specifically talk about the international, including Canada, the national, international trends on body cameras and how that body cameras should be used. I actually talked to a professor that wrote a paper, Steve White, that relates to body cameras. He was interviewed nationally about how they're being used across the nation, and there's a number of things that we're looking at on how we can use those most effectively. As you know, we have 4 committees that we organize to evaluate the body cameras. The first one is the operational part of it. How is it going to be used by our officers? The second is the equipment piece, what equipment or which vendors we go with. The third is the legal piece on what can we legally do with body cameras. And the fourth is the data collection. At this point, I can't give you all of that information because we were waiting for Deputy Chief Glampy to get back with what he learns from Calgary, but we are working on that. And as we get into that operational phase, we'll have a lot more information for you.
So, Councilmember Palmisano, let me ask you what you think about this. What if we just delayed this until DC Glampy gets back, and we'll probably get more information? I understand, how difficult it is to just know this whole thing, because, it's a completely new project or pilot, and we certainly would probably be better suited to have DC Glampy answer most of these questions, which are pretty detailed questions. What do you think?
Mr. Chair, that was always my original intent, and I thought I had modified this initial staff direction at committee, at Ways and Means Committee, to say that we wanted to wait for Deputy Chief Glampy to come back from his conference, his international conference, with the information and the insights that he's learned from it too. So I'm fine with this.
Yeah, and Councilmember Palmisano, I will take full responsibility for that. It might have been my fault that there was an oversight in me not understanding that he was going to be in Calgary, for all places. But that's good. We're going to, my understanding is that he's up in Calgary. Calgary is a city that actually did this pilot maybe a year before us, and, they're working out the kinks and trying to figure out what to do next. And so we can learn a lot from them. And so let's do that. Let's just move this to the next meeting if possible, or whenever DC Glampy gets back. And sound good?
Yes, please.
Madam Clerk, do we need to do anything with regard to this? Maybe move it to the next council meeting?
Move to postpone the item.
Okay. Well, then, council members, I'm going to move to postpone this item for the next meeting. Any discussion? All right. Oh, Councilmember Gordon.
Did we already approve the vendor then who's going to be providing services? Didn't we do that at the last council meeting?
Yeah, yes, we did. Yes.
I'm wondering if I don't know, sometimes it's great to have the company that actually makes it and is actually going to be training the officers or developing it involved in some of these presentations so we can ask other questions. I realize that might not be covered in the contract or that, but they also might really be interested because they'll see it as an opportunity to show off what a great outfit they are. So I would, we don't have to direct anybody maybe, but if we're already postponing it a little bit, I think it might be an opportunity if we could say, could we give them a chance to maybe come in and show us some of this, and maybe they even have some more visuals to show us how it works, or even some data about what's happened in other cities where they've used this that could really be interesting for us. So if that would be possible, it might be a helpful idea.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, exactly. We wanted to get some of those cameras on our officers first. We would be willing to invite those companies, there's only 2 of them, forward to give you a demonstration, a public demonstration as well, on how they work, how the data is collected, and how the officers can turn those on and off, and how they operate.
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't want to delay this a lot longer or create more problems with the idea, but maybe things can come together and that can be part of the presentation when Officer Glampy comes back.
And AC Clark, with regard to this staff direction, my sense of what we want is much more, the methodology behind it, how at the front end, we're working this whole thing together so that it comes together so that, at some point we can implement it. So, I think the information is much more methodology from the front end.
Mr. Chair, exactly. We're kind of working into this. We have some proposals and drafts on that methodology, but some of it's got to have to come after we've used the systems and we've worked it within our own officers just to get their feedback and then make some of those changes as well.
Okay. Do we have a start date on this yet?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair?
Do we have a start date on this yet? On the body cameras? Like, when do we start this? Because it's, conceivably it should have happened already, or at least, initially, those are the dates that were given to us, and now I hear it's going to be a little bit delayed. Do you know when exactly?
Mr. Chair, with the recent approval by the council to purchase those items, we're just waiting for them to come in. And then I believe by the middle to late next month is when we are proposing to get those out and operational. Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you. And you stay right there, okay? Because we're going to start with you, the next item, okay? So the fifth item on our agenda is the military training exercises, and this is a presentation or a Q&A with city departments. And the four departments that I believe are here represented are the Minneapolis Police Department, Public Works Department, the City Attorney's Office, and the Emergency Management Department. And so since you're there, why don't you just go ahead and, tell us what you know, what you guys are thinking about this, and, maybe start with 2 years ago when they came in, but also just this last time around, and how maybe we should do this in the future if there is a future for this.
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for giving us the time to talk about this issue, and we're happy to come forward and discuss or answer any questions you might have on it. My understanding with this process is that it obviously occurred in 2012. I wasn't involved in that. I've been attending the training events related to that, and I have some involvement in this year's training process. I will say before I begin that I know that I represent our department members, and we feel a very strong commitment to supporting the men and women of our armed services. When we can, we want to ensure that we're supporting them here at home or the active members that are overseas. We do that in many ways, as in supporting the VA, supporting some of the post-traumatic stress clinics that we have and ways that we deal with our veterans. And in this sense, I know that we wanted to support our military and the training that they do. I will tell you that the chief has made it very clear to me that we will not be approving any future training requests by this group. Having said that, this occurred or started to occur in about December of last year. There was a request from I'll just make sure I get it right, the Naval Special Warfare Command to Special Operations Division, that's a division within the police department, personnel. That went through the division commander to the then Deputy Chief of Patrol, who supported that training event. I was not involved in much of that process, and so as part of getting the answers that you've asked me prior to this today, we had an inquiry, and we had one of our lieutenants conduct an inquiry, an independent lieutenant, to look into the process and give us some answers that I think you're looking for today. So a lot of what I'm relaying is what we got from during that inquiry and the report that we were given. My understanding is that the Deputy Chief Patrol went not only to the chief and had discussions about this process and the training, but also to the mayor's office. Ultimately, the mayor of Minneapolis, as well as the mayor of St. Paul, needed to approve allowing this group, this command group, in to train within both cities. And in terms of developing where they were going to be training and the amount of training they were going to do, I was not involved with that. That was mostly the Special Operations Command and individuals from St. Paul. My understanding, again, from the inquiry that was done is that the mayor didn't get the full assessment on the extent of what this training would be like. I know that the chief got the assessment that our training would involve specifically the military training, and that our personnel would be supporting through logistics, and most specifically security, making sure the sites are secure and keeping people out of the site so they're safe, as well as the armed services members as they train in those areas. So as these discussions occurred with Deputy Chief of Patrol and our Special Operations Commander, they explained the process, and that culminated into a meeting sometime in early of this year that came about it with a request. Department of Defense members came to the city of Minneapolis, gave a proposal that basically said we wanted to do the same training that we did in 2012. The majority of that training, most of the public did not see. And some of that training involved helicopters. I was actually at the meeting. I didn't sit at the table with those folks. I was discussing some items with some special operations personnel, but I do specifically remember those Department of Defense folks saying that they were looking for logistical support as well as for security support. So fast forward to this August, when these actual training scenarios occurred, what we did and what I did with our communications folks was that we wrote a press release out about August 13th. That press release talked about helicopters being involved in some military training, and we wanted to notify you as the council as well as the public about that. I didn't know until later that that press release was not approved by the DOD, and that we had to actually vet any information that we released on these operations through the Department of Defense before releasing them. In fact, the Department of Defense had set a date of August 18th for release of that information, and I believe it was about 9:30 p.m. that they authorized that notice to the public as well as yourself. Unfortunately, we were told that any helicopter operations would occur on August 19th, and that did not happen. In fact, August 18th is when they started some helicopter operations within the city of Minneapolis. Again, obviously too late to get the word out to the public. And I would agree with you, and the chief also agrees, that that message should have been sent much, much earlier and much clearer to the public as well as yourself. But we didn't know that they would restrict that and that they could do that based on this being a military exercise. As you know, our communications folks made sure that they were putting out information each day as those helicopters were doing their training scenarios. They even convinced Department of Defense individuals to put out the locations of those exercises to make sure that the public knew about them, which is pretty rare for them to do. I was able to look into some of that information and get a lot of it from the inquiry that we received. So that's kind of the process for notification and what occurred. I will say that during that August 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th date, there were a number of St. Paul as well as Minneapolis minor, small military exercises that most of the public did not know about. And again, we didn't notify anybody because there wasn't any military helicopters involved, and it was very quiet. And our understanding was that it would be a very small footprint in terms of the operation. Clearly, the helicopters disturbed a number of people in the city, and the notification should have come out much sooner than it did.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to open up for questions after everyone does the presentations that they're responsible for. So if you can have a seat, I'll call the next speaker, and then if you can just hold tight, we'll open it up for questions from the council members once the last person speaks. Okay. Thank you. All right. Well, the next speaker will be from Public Works. Glenn, I'm going to butcher your last name. Gerald. Oh, terrible. Sorry.
Sherry Yang, council members. I'm Glenn Gerards. Close enough. Director of Water Treatment and Distribution Services. Regarding the event that happened at the Fridley Treatment Complex, it was one of those small footprint exercises that was just spoken to. We do not allow, through the unilateral license that we agreed to the terms of them being on our site, we do not allow any helicopters or any make sure I get the proper terminology here, fighting vehicles. What they do is they basically come in and they use our pump station number 5, which is the pump station on the river. They bring in some actors and they stage actors in that station, and then a group of military personnel come in and do their exercise. It happens, I think, from like 10 o'clock at night till around midnight. And as you know, at Fridley, we're a very isolated campus. So for the most part, they come through our security process right there at the gates. They perform their exercise. They basically clean up after themselves and they leave. And this was the second year. 2012 was the first year we allowed that type of activity, and we did again in 14. And to be honest, I had no idea that there was other activities even going on. From Public Works and Water's perspective, we felt that this was sort of an isolated thing that was happening at our campus. And like the previous speaker, we're more than happy to help the military out with those types of exercises. Considering the nature of our campus, it's quite unique. And for those of you who have been there, you can see where from a military exercise, it kind of fits all the criteria for that type of scenario.
Thank you. Our next speaker is the Emergency Management Director, Barrett Lane. And Mr. Lane, if you can just comment on whether you knew anything, and also maybe if there would have been maybe a catastrophe or something bad that might have happened, I mean, what your department might have done or would have been responsible for, or anything like that would be appreciated.
Sure. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Barrett Lane, Director of Emergency Management, for the record. We were not involved in these negotiations. In retrospect, I'm not sure we necessarily needed to be. Obviously, the police had their functions well within hand. The waterworks had their functions in hand. Our services usually kick in when you have a level of complexity that requires a larger enterprise response. And so in any events like this, if there was some sort of issue with respect to DoD assets or our assets involved in this, it would have started with that incident command at the scene. And if they had needed resources, they would have reached out to us. So from our perspective, these things always start and end at that ground level, and our services kick in once that complexity raises up to the point we have to focus the whole city resources, or we may have to do that on that event. And we're constantly prepared to do that. So, I'm one page away if they need something, and, we have a good working relationship across the city with respect to these events. So I will say that when the questions came to me, we got that back to our contacts in MPD. They were quickly and thoroughly answered. So, operational security from the DoD standpoint is really their call. As far as what I can understand, and I wasn't involved in the investigation here, MPD was doing what they were asked to do. So I don't really have any issue with respect to how this was handled. As I say, once we were involved, and that was simply someone calling and asking me, what do you know about this? They were completely forthcoming with what could be released to the public, and we made that available to people as was appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. The next speaker will be from the City Attorney's Office, and that would be Peter Gender.
Mr. Chair, from my understanding, and as we reviewed it in our office, with regard to the 2014 exercises, other than an exchange of a voicemail, I believe, between Mr. Conover in my office and the Director of Waterworks, we had no involvement with the military training for 2014. We did have some involvement in drafting the license that was referenced, that was used by Waterworks in 2012. And briefly, is my understanding that in that particular occasion, the particular military unit was invited into the city by the mayor. Waterworks was developing the license that they've referenced before. It was directed to our attention. And basically, we indicated that you couldn't use the license in that fashion because it had a number of positive actions to be taken by the city. And we indicated that if you're going to do that, it would have to come to City Council. In 2012, there wasn't time to come to the council. So it was reworked into more or less a standard license agreement for use of city property, which is typically done without coming to the council because there's no duty or obligation on the part of the city. And as was referenced in both the 2012 and the 2014 license agreements, there were restrictions that with regard to the waterworks property, that there to be no low-flying helicopters or that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, thank you. Council members, I'm going to open up for questions. Any questions? Councilmember Gordon.
I guess I just have a question about the waterworks facility in Fridley. And is this where the helicopters were stationed and there was a bunch of military personnel there and they were using that as the staging grounds? Or were they flying in from somewhere else?
Chair Yang, Councilmember Gordon. There were no helicopters at all at the Fridley facility. In fact, they entered our gates just in vehicles. They did not stage anything. As far as I know, I'm not sure the relationship between all the different maneuvers, but for the Fridley operation, it was an isolated instance. They drove through our gates, no helicopters, no fighting vehicles, and that was the extent of them visiting and doing the exercise at the Fridley site.
And they did that this year during the same time they were doing the other exercises?
My understanding is that the night of the helicopter exercise was the same night as the exercise out at the Fridley plant. But as far as I know, those episodes were isolated. Now, I'm not sure, if one led to another indirectly. But again, the SEALs that did arrive out and the supporting people that arrived out of Fridley arrived through our gates in motorized vehicles. There were no helicopters staged in that area at all.
Okay. And then I guess I have a question for the city attorney too, if that's all right?
Yeah, please.
Do we have any authority to tell the federal government that they can't bring military personnel into our city or our state, or can they just decide to do that whenever they want?
Chair Yang and Councilmember Gordon, the short answer is no. We don't have any authority. We don't regulate airspace except to the extent people might land in it. In our area, there's a possibility there, but in general, airspace is not within our control. The license that we did grant for the use of our property, we said they couldn't use low-flying helicopters. But in general, it's not within our jurisdiction to restrict airspace or the use of the airspaces.
What about when they land and stuff? Could tanks roll into the city it seems like there must be some federal law that says the federal armies are not supposed to be operating inside the states without the state's permission. I mean, it seems like we had a revolution because British soldiers were going into our houses to sleep and stuff, and we're kind of taking over. And I thought there was some kind of safeguards that prevented this, but you're saying no.
And Councilmember Gordon, you're starting to get outside my realm of experience. I typically don't deal with the Army, Navy, Air Force in this role. And the general prohibition is, military can't be used for civilian purposes, for example, in law enforcement. I mean, I understand that. But as far as any of our ability to restrict training by the military, I suspect that we would be overridden by federal law.
Okay, but there is an issue about the military functioning as the police department?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not, military cannot function as a civilian police department.
Well, and that's kind of been my experience. If there is some kind of domestic issue in the state, usually it's the National Guard that gets called in.
The National Guard gets called out, not the U.S.
So the
military.
state has kind of some jurisdiction over that. I do think the state can order them into a city, though.
The state can order the National Guard into the city under certain circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that I have.
Mr. Gettner, hold tight there. So a couple questions for you. The first is in 2012, somehow military training exercises happened at the water department in Fridley, and the military somehow bypassed city council action by doing some pretty amazing administrative things. And I'm wondering, I mean, somebody from the inside actually advised them on that. That's my guess, because, I mean, how did they know how to bypass city council action? Did somebody inform them or advise them of that, or what happened?
Chair Yang, it's my understanding that there was no bypassing of the city council action by a particular military training unit. They were trying to sign a license agreement with Waterworks for the use of the Waterworks property. In the proposal that they had, there was some affirmative action to be taken by the city in that end. when it was reviewed by our office, said, well, that would be more in the nature of a contract that would go to the city council. As I indicated earlier, there was not time through the council cycles to bring that for a contract. And so the response was, if you make it like a standard license agreement for use of property and remove all of those requirements for the city to take affirmative action on various things, that would be a standard license that the city Public Works Department has done. I won't use the word routine, but it's not uncommon for them to grant a license for use of city property.
Okay. And for 2014, I mean, the story goes that at some point, the DOD asked for permission from the mayor, and the mayor signed some sort of permission or agreement with them to allow them to come in. But I mean, that we didn't anticipate the amount of activity that did actually happen in August. So in that situation, I mean, I hear your point about us not being able to say no to the federal government in those situations, but I mean, how could we have, I guess, enforced our rights not to allow them to come in, especially in the situation where they've violated the agreement?
In Cheyenne, we do have the right to say that, for our city property that they want to use it, that we can say, no, we could decline that. That's different than, just general authority of the federal government. If they want to use our property, we have that ability, for example, not to grant that license. It doesn't mean that they still wouldn't conduct some kind of training activities, but they wouldn't use our property for that purpose. And that was what the purpose of the license for, was to have a limited use of waterworks property for that limited training that was described. And we did have language in there about the use of the helicopters. Again, obviously, if there's a feeling that that was a violation of the terms of that, then that would be something that the city could consider going forward about whether to grant such a license in the future.
Okay, but I heard from AC Clark that, I mean, what we agreed to and what they did were two different things. I mean, it seemed like they went outside the scope of that agreement. Is that not what you heard as well?
The agreement, Chair Yang, could be read to just with regard to overhead on the city's property. It's worded more broadly in that question about how much authority we have to otherwise regulate the use of the helicopters, but the intent was clearly not to allow the use of that, at least over the city property. Okay,
and Mr. Genner, do you find it problematic that the council, I mean, didn't know about this sort of consent that was given to the DOD? Because I can tell you, I didn't know about it.
Through the chair, I'm not sure if it's my call to see if it's problematic. Obviously, the council was concerned that they weren't aware of it. In 2012, it's my understanding, the council was aware of it, or at least a number of council members were aware of it before it occurred. As I said, our role in this was extremely limited to, I think, an exchange of a voicemail this year. So we didn't know what was taking place as far as taking it to the council or otherwise informing council members or the mayor about upcoming activities.
Okay. AC Clark, could I pull you up for some questions? So, AC Clark, the first question is, I know you talked about it a bit, but if you can just clarify, I mean, what kind of resources did we devote to the 2004 military training exercises?
Mr. Chair, the 2014 exercises, my understanding was approximately a dozen officers or so, and the hours that they worked those security details, protecting the sites and doing some logistics was, most of it was on duty time. It's very minimal.
And the discussions that you had with the DOD or the federal government about this, I mean, was there talk of a contingency plan if there was a catastrophe that might have happened because of the helicopters or anything else related to that in the city of Minneapolis? Because certainly they wanted to do it in a high density area where there were buildings. I mean, there could have been a disaster that happened.
Mr. Chair and committee members, like I said, I was only at one meeting where I actually wasn't at the table. My understanding from doing our inquiry is that we didn't have an answer to that question. There were a number of items that are confidential that we weren't given information on. So I guess I can't answer their contingency plans. My assumption would be that during these training events, they would have contingency plans on dealing with issues like disasters or catastrophes that you're talking about. So I can't say specifically on that.
Okay. Councilmember Gordon.
Thanks. I have a couple more questions, and maybe you might know the answer to this. Did the Department of Defense tell the police department that knew about these events that were going to be happening, not to tell the public and not to tell council members?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I did not talk to the Department of Defense when they were here doing their visit and during the training exercises. I know that we had written a specific release for the public talking on approximately August 13th, that specifically discussed the helicopter operations beginning on Tuesday of the following week. I know that I was told by our communications people that they were told not to release that until 9:30 p.m. on Monday to prevent that information from going out so that people weren't gawking at some of these training sites in the helicopters. Their sense was that that would keep the public safe as well as those operators that were doing those exercises. Again, I didn't get that until after this training was going on, and then we really ramped up trying to get that notification out to you and the council. Were we told specifically, do I know anything about the DOD saying do not contact the council members or the council of the city of Minneapolis? No, I don't know about that.
But they did say don't share the public information until the day of the first exercise. Is that what Monday, was that the first day of the exercises?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, they said do not put out that the helicopters are going to be used until the night before, but unfortunately they started using them that night that they released that public release. They were doing military exercises the week prior as well, but again, that was a very small footprint. But it was more about the helicopters and notifying the public, and their stance was don't release it until 9 o'clock. And they did have final say on the communications that went out.
So they were telling us when we could communicate. And then they even changed their plan because they also told us, sure, let them know we're going to start Tuesday, and then they started Monday instead.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, that's correct. My understanding in talking to our communications folks was that they did do some helicopter operations the night of the 18th, August 18th, in the city, and that we were informed prior to that they wouldn't start until the 19th.
And it was my understanding that it was actually some of the police department that kept going back and saying, this isn't acceptable, we need a little more notice, we need a little more notice. So on Tuesday, I think we did understand, and I'm not sure how accurate it was, but that we were told at about 6 that something was going to start at about 8. And I might have the times wrong, but we got a couple hours notice. And that also went out to the public, at least in the area. There was even some flyering, and I appreciate the effort that the department's communications staff made, because I have to tell you, people were really upset that first day. They were really confused that first day. And I looked like a big idiot because I couldn't say what was going on. All I could say was, no, I haven't really been informed about this either. And yes, you're absolutely right. 2 helicopters could have smashed into your high-rise apartment building with 3,000 people living in there, and there could have been a horrible accident. And no, this isn't a police, effort to shut down any protest about Ferguson. I mean, you can't imagine, maybe you can, probably you can. But we're all being so calm and civil here. This was a pretty big deal for our city, and people were really alarmed and concerned and wondering what was going on, and we didn't have a lot of good answers we could tell them. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. And I have one other question, and I'm not sure if you know this, but can we get a copy, or is the copy of whatever the mayor signed, is that public information? I know that I saw a copy of a letter that Mayor Ryback signed regarding, I think, 2012, and was actually a letter inviting the Department of Defense in. And do we know what the mayor actually signed? Do we have a copy of that?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I did see a copy of that as part of the inquiry. That whole case file is part of a department investigation. I'm not sure if we can release that at this point. I'll talk to Bert Osborne about that and the possibility of that. My understanding is that there was a request to the DOD by the lieutenant who did the inquiry, and they handed over that document.
Okay. Can you tell us, Mr. Osborne, if that was an invitation letter similar to what the Mayor Ryback had signed?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, I haven't seen the letter you're talking about, so it'd be irresponsible for me to opine on whether or not it's public data or not.
And then, Mr. Chair, I do have a staff direction for this one too that I can pass out.
Okay, council members, any other questions before Councilmember Gordon moves a staff direction? Anybody? All right, Councilmember Gordon, why don't you go ahead and.
Thank you. And this is a staff direction that actually was shared with the mayor's office and with the city attorney's office. And this is asking the city of Minneapolis staff or directing the city of Minneapolis staff not to authorize expenditures of city resources on future military training exercises in Minneapolis unless approved by the city council, and further directing the city attorney to develop a process, including engagement of the council for considering approval of future requests by federal agencies, including but not limited to the Department of Defense and other military units, to conduct activities in Minneapolis that are likely to cause disruption to Minneapolis residents and businesses.
Councilmember Gordon, why don't you speak to that?
I can speak to it or not.
Let me have you speak to it, and then Councilmember Reich.
This was concerning to a lot of my constituents in the area. They were frightened. My biggest concern was that I thought it actually posed a very serious public safety risk to people, because these were big machines full of fuel flying in an urban area that was densely populated. It didn't make any sense. I thought from my perspective, to allow training in those areas. I also have to confess, I feel a pretty paternalistic responsibility that one of my jobs here is try to watch out for the public safety of the people that I represent. And it seemed like I really wasn't doing my job when I couldn't even warn people about this. I couldn't even say, you might want to get out of your apartment building while they're flying by. I just had visions of terrible accidents, exercises. These are obviously people in training. How often have they done this before? Here they are weaving close to skyscrapers in more than one helicopter near one another. And of course, I had visions of a airborne vehicle full of fuel smashing into a building, and a horrible experience. I'll also confess that I was on the council when the bridge fell, and I think being on the council when the bridge fell, or just being in the city of Minneapolis, it just shows you that really strange, unexpected things you can't predict are happening, and we should be careful. And I think we need to be careful about these kinds of things, and I'm sure that wasn't necessarily the priority of the Department of Defense. So maybe having some people who put a priority on the safety of the residents to at least look at some of these things and vet them ahead of time is really the wisest thing that we could do. So I want to be able to get a process that'll work in place. I've actually talked to the chief about this, and the chief would prefer that we never allow these things. And I can't really speak for the chief, but as I recall the conversation, she said she never has an intention of and she doesn't see any reason why any of these things should happen again, unless she or the city had full control over what's happening, when it's happening, and all of these things about it, and there was the sense we really didn't over this. So I think that there's a lot of support in city staff, and hopefully from my colleagues, that we take a careful look at this and we try to make sure that we have a bigger approval process and notification process. And it just makes sense that the city council should have some kind of a say in this.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I believe the first part of the direction, the first paragraph kind of covers the expense side of the issue. But in terms of directing a specific department, the city attorney, to develop the process, is that something that we want to state now, or does that need to be further vetted with the coordinator's office? Maybe is this maybe under the purview of the police department? I'm just wondering, why did we land on city attorney's office, or has that been previously vetted amongst the department heads as the appropriate home for this direction?
Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I think we thought they might be able to do a good job, but there really isn't any reason. I'm glad that you brought that up, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't add the city coordinator and the Minneapolis Police Department to work together on that effort. And my assumption, I think, would be if we directed one department to do that and they were competent, they'd certainly include others in that. But I'd be open to that amendment if you wanted to add something else in there.
Yeah, how about we just strike directing a department to do a set amount of work that that hasn't been vetted with them or any other department, that there's a commitment to work with the chair and yourself, the chair of this committee rather, and yourself, and potentially, because this is on the face of it anyways, a multi-jurisdictional issue, at least approach the IGR chair and the city coordinator's office and just maybe have a sit down to see how that gets, how we achieve what you're asking here and who actually does it. And then that can be either shared here at committee or just executed offline, because I think it's the end result that we're looking for.
Councilmember Gordon, do you have a response? Or
I'm not exactly sure what you were saying. So you were saying to take the second section out and do some more work beforehand. Well, I'd hate to see us get stuck dragging our feet on it. And I think one of the issues is who can we actually direct from this committee and who can't we? I would be committed to work with the attorney's office and try to put that together and move forward on it. But I'd also like to see something leave committee saying that the committee authorizes this work going forward. I think it would help us get it done better.
So, Councilmember Wright.
Then my substitute will be to further directing appropriate staff to develop a process, and then as written.
All right. Well, I'm going to call that motion. Substitute. I'm going to say it's a friendly amendment to add or subtract the directing of the city attorney, but to just say appropriate city staff to develop a process. And so I'm going to put that forward as a motion. Anyone want to speak to that? Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I can appreciate that, although I would like to see some staff designated, and perhaps it's more appropriate if Mr. Lane took the lead on this, I don't know, but I'm worried that if we say appropriate staff, who's going to figure out who the appropriate staff is? So we could maybe move it out of committee like that. My understanding now is every staff direction will go to the full council, according to the clerk's ruling. So we could help figure out what the appropriate staff is and work on defining it, but I won't want to necessarily see it approved saying appropriate staff, because that means it's just difficult for us to get the work done. So I guess I'm backpedaling and saying I can handle that, although I wouldn't mind having the city attorney and other appropriate staff be directed to do it.
All right. Anybody else to speak on that? I guess it's not friendly anymore, that motion before us. All right, so hearing none, let me restate the motion of Councilmember Reich. Councilmember Reich is asking for this staff direction to have a change of language for the second paragraph, and the second paragraph would be stating further directing the appropriate city staff to develop a process, including engagement of the council, ... All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. All those opposed? All right, well, the motion does carry then. Okay, and so, yep, I'm gonna get to that. So, Councilmember, the original motion on the floor is a motion to approve the staff directive, and now it's a staff directive with the change of language from Councilmember Reich. Councilmember Palmisano, you have a comment or question?
Mr. Chair, not to confuse this more, but I'm curious. In the first paragraph, when it directs city staff not to authorize expenditures of city resources unless approved by city council, can you help to explain, or Mr. Gordon could, Councilmember Gordon, could you explain whose home committee would that then be? Would it be a public safety committee thing, or would it be a Ways and Means home committee?
Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I think it would depend on what resources were being utilized. A lot of things go through a committee and then they go to Ways and Means if they have to do with money. I think if the police were being asked by the Department of Defense to provide 12 staff people and 6 cars and a couple of cameras and some communications officers to help them with that, that would be a use of resources that should come to our committee. And then it would move on to the council. But I mean, that is a good question. I think it could get complicated if it was the waterworks facility. Again, that would be more of a public works decision, and staff would review it and they'd say, oh, sure, we'd like to put some resources into helping them with this exercise about water rescue or whatever. Let's bring that to the Public Works Committee and they could review that.
Thank you. If I might suggest, I think since all of these kinds of military exercises are focused around disaster recovery and emergency management, I would suggest it go through Mr. Lane to the appropriate committees, whether that's public safety, most likely, or whether it's some other committee of council.
Councilmember Gordon?
Is that an amendment?
Councilmember Warsame?
My question is, isn't it the city attorney who wrote up the contract with the DOD for the public works?
My understanding is that they consulted, but that they didn't write the contract. And Glenn, I mean, do you want to clarify that?
This is Councilmember Yang, Chair Yang, council members. I would probably have Peter answer that question. He's probably better suited than I. I mean, it was a license agreement which the legal people did review, and it was specific just to that exercise at Fridley, just at that Fridley campus. So,
Mr. Gentner, do you have anything to add to that?
Chair Yang, my understanding is we reviewed the 2012, document. We did not review the 2014 document, but that's all I would have on that.
So who reviewed it? Nobody? There was no review?
Glenn can correct me, but I believe that Public Works put it together based on the 2012 contract, or 2012 license agreement, more correctly.
So should this go to Public Works then? If, in terms of getting clarification in the future, should it just go directly to Public Works?
Well, so let me clarify this. So what happened in 2012 was that the military exercises occurred, but essentially they went through Public Works to have that happen, and that primarily was what happened at the Water Department in 2014. It changed a little bit. I mean, they did some exercises maybe at the Water Department, but for the most part, I mean, they did it all around the city, including in downtown Minneapolis. And the authorization that they got was they got permission from the mayor's office to do that. And so that's kind of just what happened. And for the most part, some or maybe most of the city council members, if not all of us, didn't know about what was happening. And to Councilmember Gordon's point, I mean, that's the part that is difficult for us, is because we can't answer questions of our constituents when that happens. Yeah. Mr. Gender.
Chair, if I can just offer a suggestion, I don't know that you need to decide today which committee this would go to, because when you get this assigned out and staff develops a process for you, the process will probably dictate which would be the appropriate committee to come back to. So I think that would be the time to verify that, yes, it comes back to transportation or ways and means or public safety, whichever one we want as we develop that process. And so,
right. Or, the best answer is always, we want it to come back to public safety. That's a bad joke. Okay. All right. So, council members, the motion before us is to approve this staff direction. And any other questions or comments? All right. Well, I'm going to.
I fully support this.
Okay.
We need to get heads up.
Okay.
In comparison to last time.
So hopefully I can add the final comment. I hate when situations like this happen where the media knows more than us. I mean, Steve Tellier is right out there, and I was following his story for the most part, because that was kind of the most informative And, it gave us the most information about what was happening, but for the most part, we didn't know what was happening, or most of us didn't know what was happening. And, it's always good for us to be informed about these sorts of things, just because I think, at a minimum, we have to be concerned about the safety of our residents in all of Minneapolis. And, as Councilmember Gordon mentioned, sometimes when we can't answer questions, but it's happening all around us, people expect more from us. And so, it's really important for us to know. And, I support this staff direction because, it does, direct our staff to look into these situations more, and not to authorize expenses, and also just to develop this policy for how we should know about future training exercises that might happen in the city. So with that, council members, anybody who wants to add anything more? All right. Well, the motion before us is to approve this staff directive, and I'm not going to read the whole staff directive, but you all understand that there was an amendment to this, crossing out the city attorney and just putting appropriate city staff, but outside of that, it remains the same. And so all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oppose? All right, the motion carries. And I think with that, our meeting is adjourned. We don't have any further business before this committee. Thank you very much.